The next working session will be on preventive care component specifically in family medicine. And it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Noreen Rafiq to moderate the session for us.
So we're going to start this working session, which is on preventive medicine, something very close to my heart. We have a panel of very accomplished people who are going to come on the stage. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the session chair for this session, Major General Amir Ikram, Executive Director, National Institute of Health. Dr. Amir graduated in 1987, did Diploma in Pathology, qualified MCPS, Fellowship in Microbiology in 1998, clinical training from the UK 2005, and PhD in 2014. Qualified Diploma in Occupational Health and Safety, followed by Diploma in Disaster Management, excelled in the fields of biosafety, biosecurity, dual-use safety, and infection control, accomplishing a wide range of courses from renowned universities like Harvard, Oxford, South Florida, Iowa, Chester, Bradford, etc., and workshops from UN, WHO, CDC, ASM, and ABSA. He has been Chief Editor of Infectious Disease Journal Pakistan and is on the editorial board of renowned national and international journals. Have more than 150 publications, goodness. Holds multiple portfolios including President Medical Microbiology and Infectious Disease Society of Pakistan, HEC focal point of expertise under National Research Program for universities, and many more. Please join me in welcoming Major General Amir Ikram. Welcome, sir. I'm going to have my first panelist, Professor Muhammad Iqbal Khan. He's Vice Chancellor, Shifa Tamir Millat University. Professor Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Khan, a medical graduate of 1985, holds fellowship in surgery from the Royal College of Surgeons of England in Glasgow, diploma in vascular surgery from UK, and master's in health professional education from Netherlands. He has held numerous academic clinical leadership positions, both nationally and internationally. He's former Dean of Faculty of Health and Medical Sciences, the University of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and founder principal of Azad Jammu and Kashmir Medical College, Muzaffarabad, and earlier served at RIFA International University as head of surgery and head of clinical sciences, besides serving at various positions in National Health Services, UK. Please join me in welcoming Professor Muhammad Iqbal Khan. Welcome, sir. My second panelist is Professor Shakil Mirza. Professor Dr. Shakil Mirza graduated from the Army Medical College in 1985. Having trained in the UK, he became a member and then Fellow of Royal College of Physicians, London, and subsequently Fellow of College of Physicians and Surgeons, Pakistan. He's founding member of AMCOLIANS Alumni Association and its immediate past president. He has been instrumental in fostering undergraduate research culture at his alma mater, as well as establishing strong linkages with medical diaspora abroad like APNA, APPS, UK, concurrently with local specialty societies in Pakistan. Please welcome Professor Shakil Mirza. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and welcome Ijaz Khan, Head of Department, Family Medicine, HSA. Dr. Ijaz Ahmed Khan is one of the highly recognized public health specialists in Pakistan and abroad. He's currently an associate professor at the Academy and pursuing MPhil PhD at the LSHTM UK. He has held key responsibilities in the Ministry of Health in managing disasters and emergencies and represented the ministry in the NDMA. In this context, he held the post of manager HEPR. He started his career as medical officer in year 2000. After a few months, he joined the academy as instructor. Dr. Khan obtained Thai government scholarship for masters and PhD and obtained the degree with distinctive grades. He has been involved in a number of courses, including child health, population dynamics, health systems, environmental and occupational health, disaster management, and research process at the academy. Please welcome Ijaz Khan. All right, with this, we will have only one talk, and for that, I will be inviting Dr. Tahmeena Kazmi. Dr. Tahmeena Kazmi graduated from Fatma Jinnah Medical College, Lahore, 1984. She worked in Pakistan on a project sponsored by John Snow Insurance in collaboration with Family Planning Association of Pakistan for maternal and child health. In 1992, she joined Columbia University School of Medicine, New York, to work in clinical research. Later, after completing her residency in family medicine from Bronx, Lebanon Hospital in 2000, she started as attending physician at Woodhull Hospital. In 2007, she joined the New York University School of Medicine and provided community health and was involved in teaching and precepting residents and medical students. In 2012, she moved to NYU Abu Dhabi as medical director, where she developed medical center for students, faculty, staff, and their families. She has also been involved in developing family medicine in China. Please welcome Dr. Kazmi. Dr. Kazmi is going to talk about overview of comprehensive preventive care and environmental health.
Assalamu alaikum. I really thank everyone here, our Apna team, Dr. Naheed, for arranging this wonderful conference, the organizers, and our very respected panelists. But I have seen a lot of energy in this auditorium. I'm coming from NYU, very much student focused, and the energy in the students is lovely. To me, they are the ones who will benefit the most from this conference because they are the future builders of primary care in Pakistan, and they will definitely be the future leaders of healthcare. In addition to my slides, I learned a lot while sitting in the audience yesterday, and I wrote some bullet points which were not added to my presentation. Because when you sit here, you listen to the presenters and speakers, but you hear the side conversations also. So it's interesting when people are making comment about primary care. I think a lot of people have questions in their mind. Why should I do that? It's too tough to do certain things. I think people who are here in this room as students, nothing is difficult for them because they're already in such a great medical school. They should be able to do anything and everything they can think of in life. I would like to emphasize, which is not unfortunately on my slide, what is the unique role of family physician providing preventive care, but that would make you a leader in healthcare also. We are unique, and we have a special power that we know a lot about healthcare in the entire population. Pediatrics, young, the adolescents, pregnant women, adults, geriatrics. So when I was brought to NYU Abu Dhabi, my initial role was to develop a medical center. And we wanted to have, because in the US, universities have student health centers. They provide a lot of care. Actually, they are becoming their patient-centered medical homes for the students. So in that development, being a family medicine person, I think I had a lot of power in developing a lot of policies for the university. My knowledge of public health in people of all ages enabled me to develop relationships with the local health authorities to collaborate and develop the health center policies which were in line with the university policies. Like we had cases of varicella and pertussis on our campus, so I knew how would it affect a pregnant woman, how would it affect a newborn, what preventive measures we have to take. So I felt very confident being a family physician. Then the other power I feel in my specialty is like I sit on the institution's review board for the protection of human subjects, and a lot of research proposals are based for pediatrics. So for me to do the risk assessment is so easy. I know when you have to put a child in MRI for the research purpose, what is needed as a doctor. Is it worth doing research on a university setting, or they have to involve a hospital there? The other examples I can give is being a leader in healthcare. My understanding of, again, pediatrics, young adults, pregnant women, we have to prepare for the emergency preparedness plans for the institution. We have to do risk and compliance. So in collaboration with working with our public safety teams, with our risk and compliance, with the legal teams, the family care providers who want to be healthcare leaders, they will have an advantage of knowing how to do the risk assessment for patients of all ages. Then the maternal and child health programs, it's an advantage because again, you know the children health, you know the maternal health, you know the prenatal health. There are so many programs like USAID. I myself worked in a World Health Organization sponsored program when I came out of medical school and finished my residency, my house job here. Bill Gates has donated a huge fund to work on polio eradication in Pakistan. So our primary care health providers not only will sit in a primary care health center and provide primary care and preventive care, they can do a lot. We are so much trained in mental health issues and social aspects in our patient population, how to navigate different processes, which could be a hurdle in people getting to treatment. I have developed a psychological first aid program for our university, and it's going very well because I understood that if there is an event, it's said that the medical impact of any disaster is less than the psychological impact of the disaster. So we know if there is a disaster, how children are going to react, how their thank you. So knowing how to handle with children when there is a natural disaster, how to calm them and how to provide help to them, that goes to our advantage. I will talk about preventive health, which is on my slides now, and the role of a family physician in providing primary care to the entire population. In addition to provide the treatment, we do prevent disease and we do health promotion. We keep ourselves current with the preventive guidelines. We educate our patients on the modifiable risk factors. We discuss with them the challenges, what doesn't bring them to healthcare, and how can we help them to get to the point that they can get healthcare. We notify the public health authorities of the reportable diseases. We do recognize mental health, social issues, which is which is a huge thing in getting to healthcare. I like the slide. I don't know how many you can see this well. It looks funny that this is a guy who came with all the nicotine patches on his face and neck. And the person is telling that you have to remove the patch. We can laugh at that, but we, the primary care providers, have a very important function of doing the medicine reconciliation. How we are educating our patients on what they are taking, what over-the-counter things they are taking, and how they have to take the medicine is very important, because they might be doing something which has a bad interaction, or they might be overdosing themselves, because sometimes they go from provider to provider, and if you don't have access to the unified medical records, they forget telling providers about what they are taking. So that is a very important part on the primary healthcare providers. And the next one is also the same. He said the diet says to take 1800 calories per day, but nobody told to me what is the nighttime diet about, so I'm having a bag of potatoes at night. These are some leading causes of death in the US. The chart is from 2017, but I don't think it has changed too much. Most of them, except for one, I think, are preventable diseases. So talking about preventable, it's the heart disease, it's the cancer, preventable injuries, chronic respiratory diseases, and a lot of them. Preventable causes of death, number one is smoking. So we the primary care providers, we the family medicine people, we see people, as Dr. Naheed said, in Pakistan, the age of people starting smoking is so young, 11. So we have the opportunity and power to teach our young population not to start, and if someone has started, how to help them with that. Primary prevention, basically it is a prevention to avoid the manifestation of a disease. These are the common examples of primary care prevention, which is vaccination, nutritional and food supplement, dental hygiene. The last one I really like is the legislation and enforcement to mandate safe practices. It's not the implementation of those safe practices, but the legislation of that. Like the seat belts reduce the risk of death by 45% and cut the risk of serious injury by 50% in the drivers and front seat riders. I think it is a very important thing to be implemented by our lawmakers. Secondary prevention, it deals with the early detection when this improves the chances for positive health outcomes. And the examples are provision of maternal and child health programs, population-based regular exams and screening, like mammograms, pap smears, daily low-dose aspirin, or diet and exercise programs to prevent further heart attacks or strokes. Tertiary prevention is focuses on people who already have been affected by the disease, and the goal is to improve their quality of life. And the examples are like cardiac or stroke rehab programs, vocational rehab programs to retrain workers for new jobs. Preventive care is a very vast topic. I am going to focus on pediatric and prenatal, which makes us unique and different from our IM fellows also. And the reason I picked this was that millions of pregnant women, new mothers and children experience severe illnesses or death each year, which are largely from preventable or treatable causes. In recent years, the US has placed a higher priority on maternal child health as one of its main global health goals. In pediatric population, we the family medicine people, we do see pediatrics. We go through anticipatory guidance with their parents. We provide them with health education for the children. As a primary prevention, we provide them with vaccinations, nutrition or food supplementation, Oral health is very important in pediatric population. We do promote that. Preventing pediatric overweight and obesity. The reduction of incidence of injuries by having speed limits, pool fences, fire guards, stair gates. And prevention of maltreatment by providing parent education and public awareness campaigns. Secondary prevention in pediatrics is provided again by us, the family physicians, and definitely our pediatric partners. Prevention of child maltreatment, overweight and obese. This is focused to the population with risk factors, not to the entire population. We do prevent falls or injuries by child safety car seats, bicycle helmets, smoke alarms. Bicycle helmets reduce the risk of bicycle-related head injury by about 80%. It's big. It's very big. So I think the burden is on us to educate our patients and their parents on this. And the regular welfare and dental visits and screenings is something we promote. Preventive prenatal and patient education. I really like my own role doing a lot of women health in my practice. A lot of things are not like a traditional OBS appointment about listening to the fetal heart rate or doing the position or how much amniotic fluid is there and the plan for delivering the baby. There are a lot of practical issues that needs to be discussed. Like pregnant women should be educated on when to call a provider. There is a vaginal bleeding or change in vaginal discharge, leakage of vaginal fluid, fever, pain, excessive vomiting, I would say, acute shortness of breath or cough in the pain, headaches, visual changes, dysuria, pruritus. Is she experiencing of uterine contractions, crampy abdominal pain, decreased fetal activity after the perception of fetal activity, fainting or dizziness, and any change in their health status from their baseline status? Then there are certain topics to discuss with them. Sleeping positions. They should be sleeping comfortably, but after a certain point, you don't want them to be supine all the time because you don't want to compromise the uteroplacental blood flow. So discussing those kind of things with them. Travel and airlines. How should they travel? In airlines, what is the timeline? 37 weeks after a single pregnancy, 32 weeks after a twin pregnancy. Use of insect repellents is very important because these days people travel. People travel a lot. People go to places with Zika and now Corona is a different thing now. So they should be using insect repellents, screen, and educate on depression and breastfeeding. I will quickly go through these because I think I've taken too much time. I'm left with less time. And healthy behaviors we can discuss, immunizations we can discuss, precautions against infections, and management of common discomforts. I will go to the topic which is very important, environmental health. WHO defines environment as it relates to health as all physical, chemical, and biological factors external to a person and all related behaviors. Why is it important? Globally, 23% of all deaths and 26% of deaths among children under the age of 5 are due to preventable environmental causes, factors. There are many, many factors, hazardous substances, natural disasters, like we had the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010, climate change, occupational hazards, and the built environment, like how we build our places, sidewalks, bicycle friendly, all those things. Outdoor air quality is very important because the premature deaths, cancers, and long-term damage to respiratory and cardiovascular. These days, we all know about the fires in Australia and California. The materials that were built burning has a bad effect on us. Surface and groundwater. This is very interesting research. Maybe some of you have read it, some of you not. There was a group of scientists in England. They did drug testing on shrimps. They found high cocaine and ketamine levels on that. So probably the urine wastage was the source of contamination. So what we are putting in our oceans is very important. The role of family physicians in environmental health, they identify common health problems. They are the front face talking to the patients. They do provide travel consults, and there's a very good example how the Michigan Academy of Family Physicians was involved in Flint water crisis, where in Michigan, in Flint, water was contaminated. There was a big lead poisoning. The third largest Legionnaires outbreak in the US happened. They're still fixing the pipes, and hopefully by July this year, they will fix it. The primary prevention through mitigation, the numbers, you can look at that. I would like to go through the innovative approaches by the policymakers. The individual measures can be done by people themselves, but the doctors have to tell them, like radon, it's in the soil. They have to educate their people how to do a good ventilation system and how they can prevent by the hazards. At the governmental level, there should be policies which you can have a look at that. Healthcare policies, I think, are very important because it applies to all of us. How much of radiation we are exposing to our patients, how many really CT scans and MRIs are necessary. California state has a CT dose law, which states for each patient undergoing a CT scan, a volumetric CT dose index and dose length must be recorded. There are a lot of control measures that can be taken in working environment, regulating the use of protective equipment. PPE is very common in all the environmental related health hazards. Like with coronavirus, half of the world is wearing masks. But it's a very interesting slide. This just tells you that there is a maintenance for PPEs also. Just putting PPE, whether on the face or on the hand or anywhere, is not sufficient. So the guy, if you cannot read it, it says, hey Larry, did you replace the cartridges in all the respirators this morning? It was not to be done this morning. Check it and then wear it. Don't think about it later. The new challenge, COVID, being a family physician myself, working for the institution, we had to develop policies, and I would say all of our young audience who will go in healthcare, be leaders there, being a family physician again, they will have an advantage because they will know a lot about all agents, do the risk, prepare the first responders, healthcare workers, and health systems, reinforcing local public health policies, supporting businesses. If you are working in an organization or an institution, have business guidance, business continuity program. It has to be developed before a crisis comes, and develop the programs for the community. I think I'm on time. Thank you.
Excellent talk, Dr. Fahmina. With this, I'm going to have Major General Amir Ikram to come and please give his comments. While we will be having the comments from the panelists and the session chair, please go ahead and get ready with your questions so that we can do the question and answer session later on. Thank you very much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman. I think touching very, very important topic, and I think the depth of the slides was showing definitely because of the paucity of time, you couldn't cover up each point individually. But these are a little bit neglected aspects as far as our curricula is concerned, as far as our modalities are concerned. So I think it's high time that we need to reevaluate our curricula as far as environmental health is concerned. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation that you have made and sharing your experiences with the audience. Now, moving on, I think primary care, healthcare system is the main place, focusing on these environments, because that's basically located within that area and truly understanding the modalities. You've just seen good examples of advanced countries, and then coming down to a very touchy topic of COVID-19 that the whole globe, until today, we have got now 84 countries suffering from this virus. And you never know when it stops and from where it goes now. But as far as COVID is concerned, I'm ready to answer any question of the audience, because at NIH we are dealing this one. Occupational safety. is yet another neglected aspect side by side with the environments because ergonomics play a very important role. All the doctors, the students, the paramedics, they're all exposed to hazards all the time. And one of the main components is the hospital infection control. So for your information, just wanted to highlight that Alhamdulillah, we have established a first ever Occupational Safety and Patient Safety Institute within NIH at the public sector level by the name of COPS. That is the Center for Occupational and Patient Safety. We have already prepared the hospital infection control guidelines, and I'm sure we can share all this thing later on. But again, these things are hardly taught at the national level. Policies, you very elaborately talked about the policies. Policies do exist. They may be patchy at times, and I truly believe such documents have to be live documents all the time. You keep modifying them, you keep adding in the light of new scenarios, the new eventualities. Just to give you one example, for the COVID, comprehensive national action plan has already been prepared, and it was prepared a long time back once it started off with all the standing operating procedures. And we keep modifying because it's a novel virus, you never know where it evolves, where it goes. And if you see China, a good number of paramedics have already unfortunately suffered from this virus. So the exposure, the hazards, wherever you're working, it's not the hospital, it's everywhere that you go, there has to be an occupational safety, and this is the trend that we have seen in international universities, or every university, every academic institute and other institutes. They do have an occupational safety office where you report such matters. So I think as the things move on at the national level, we keep modifying them not only at the governmental level and provincial level, but moving on, every stakeholder has to play a role. And I think the students are the most important in this regard. As Iqbal said, naram dame guftugu aur garam dame justuju. थोड़ा सा order reverse हो गया. अब हम गरम दमे गुफ्तगू और नरम दमे जुस्तजू हो गए और मोबाइल्स ने मेरे ख्याल बहुत ज़्यादा टेक ओवर कर लिया है. As we can. So I think where we failed, where our generation and failed, I think it is the time for the new generation who are very well versed with all these things. And you can Google anything. And in every house there is a Google doctor as well these days. So be aware of that Google doctor, because that we also, being a doctor, we suffer from such Google doctors when we go back home. So with all that in mind, I think there's much to deliberate. Extremely grateful to you for your talk, and we open the house for the panelist discussion.
Thank you very much. It's interesting, he was talking about medical students. When a medical student rotates with us, majority of the education part to the patients is actually done by medical students. Because sometimes we are so busy in our clinics that, you know, we have seen a patient, now we have to do some tobacco cessation education, and we have our students go in and talk to the patients. Extremely important preventive care. This is the bread and butter of family medicine. We're going to have 2-minute comments from our panelists. So Professor Shakil Mirza.
Thank you very much. If you, we are familiar with the Helsinki Declaration and Tokyo Declaration and New York Declaration. We all know that the functions of the doctors are the clinical work, the preventive work, the social work, the research and innovation, and the continuous medical education or continuous health professional education. We cannot implement these recommendations which I have been listening since yesterday unless we educate our youth. What is the mechanism of educating our youth in primary health care? We discussed since yesterday that primary health care is not very developed in Pakistan. We have our graduates in public sector as well as in the private sector. They just go raw to the community and try to treat our patients in the primary health care. So therefore, I strongly believe that the universities, the medical schools, and our medical institution, health professional education should start something from very beginning in their curricula. Our curricula is not actually in line with our national need. We need to sit together to align our curricula and particularly to make it contextual to our requirement. We at Shifa, what we have done is that we started family medicine department, and I believe the Saima should be here. Yes, Professor Saima is leading this department. This department is actually played a very vital role in educating our undergraduate students. We have a family medical medicine exams. This is the everywhere, not only in Pakistan. Wherever you go, if you don't have the examination in a certain subject, people don't care about that. So therefore, we introduced an exact examination in Pioneer, and there are only 3 examinations: is medicine, surgery, and family medicine. And we have a full-fledged family medicine rotation, where these students in small groups, they go to the periphery, they go to our primary healthcare center, and they actually learn on spot, practically learn how to do the preventive work and how to do a clinical work at this level. I think the Rawalpindi Medical University has recently started modular curriculum. This is a very good move, but I think they should make it more contextual by introducing family medicine at educational level, number 1. Number 2, at the postgraduate level. So we can only train our at the undergraduate level if we have our postgraduate properly trained. Our doctors are properly trained, the teachers are properly trained. For that particular purpose, I think the College of Physicians, Surgeons have some programs, but all the university, they must introduce a postgraduate programs at the quality postgraduate programs to produce some family medicine specialists. And this is the specialty. It is not considered that GP is a specialty. Family medicine is a specialty. And thirdly, we need to introduce a family medicine nursing as well. So now the nursing is in Pakistan is a very big problem. Nursing are not being prepared. But at certain level, we need to introduce a community nurse as well, the program for the community nurse. And therefore, if we want to make it a comprehensive care at the primary level and want to reduce the burden at the secondary and tertiary care level, we need to strengthen by our primary health care, by the nursing care programs at this level. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So if I could summarize, the very important aspect that he touched upon is the interprofessional and collaborative care. We need to get nurses and paramedic staff involved in the care. Like we have medical students, we have physicians, we have medical assistants, we have nurses, all of them diabetic educators. We can have all of these people involved in the care of a patient, which is preventive care. With this, we will have Professor Muhammad Iqbal Khan to give his 2-minute.
Professor Iqbal is done with his remarks, and I really appreciate especially the integration at the undergraduate level and the provision of family medicine at the clinical level in a tertiary care setup. I would start by paying my gratitude to Apna Chair, Professor Naeed Usmani, Dr. Danish and Dr. Shahid Rafiq for having me here. I have 2 points to make. One is a general one, in the sense that this is really a need of the hour, critical need, that we create networks of primary care and preventive medicine. And this is just not at undergraduate or postgraduate level. I think we must go to the prevention is in the community. We have some very good family physicians sitting here in the front row. And I think we must reach out to them as a community of medical professionals to involve them in the preventive care, maybe primary or secondary, it can be at both levels. But I think it's high time that apart from educating our professionals, we do something in real practice. And for that, as you mentioned, the modifiable risk factors, I'll talk to you separately about that. And then we have some very important psychosocial and mental health issues. These are 2 things that are really crux in preventing the diseases. We are an evolving society. The healthcare facilities are very fragmented, but those patients who come to us for care, we must involve them and their families, not only in the secondary prevention of the disease of that individual patient, but in the primary prevention of the whole family. Because we do not have a system of regular health screening, health checks, affordability, cost, doctor's time, all these issues are there, apart from the issues of paramedics that Dr. Khan has highlighted. I think that other than paramedics, what we really need is good nutritional counseling, be it at the primary care level, at the secondary care level, as well as we need to involve, as Jalnam Ikram was saying about occupational health and safety, the occupational therapist, not only for the community in general, but for the healthcare institutions as well. There's a lot of health hazards within our own institutions which are not being addressed at this point in time. So, most important is, I think, we must create the network of professionals which can cross-link with each other, both vertically and horizontally, in the same healthcare system, as well as within the different tiers of the healthcare system, so as to provide those preventive medicine education, training, and of course the clinical care that's needed. Of course, one big problem is, as you said, the Shifa Tamir Millet University has an assistant professor, but there are not enough posts of family physicians. In the armed forces, we had an experiment about 10 years ago. We have a system of primary cares like staff surgeons and MI rooms in garrison medical centers. But their career progression, the College of Physicians and Surgeons then started a fellowship in family medicine. People did their fellowships, but since there was no designated career path for vertical progression, many people opted out of those programs and went into internal medicine and things like that. So I think at the national level, we must, it was discussed yesterday, but unless we come out with clear-cut guidelines for the government to act, this effort would be lacking. And lastly, a question for Dr. Kazmi. We have had a horrid time over there with the modifiable risk factors. How do you fare over there? How good the patients are at modifying their lifestyles?
All patient populations are challenged for a provider, I would say everywhere. Even in the US, I'm in Abu Dhabi for many years. We have faculty, staff, and students, I would say, from more than 110 countries. It is always a challenge for the provider. It's never easy because learning is something, and changing behavior, I think people who are psychologists, they would agree to this. Making a change is the most difficult thing for a person. Even in our community center in New York, we had to change the waiting time. We had to reduce waiting time, and we had a target time. So we had to train the whole clinic for that. To change the habits are not easy. They're not easy.
I would agree to that. And I think there is a common theme that I've been hearing since yesterday, and that we have to have an extremely good quality teaching and a direction where we all need to go. Persistently doing that. So that's amazing. All right, Ijaz Khan, you're next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I'll thank Dr. Shahid, Dr. Danish. I remember a year ago when they came to my office and we were talking about starting a family medicine course in Pakistan. KMU was doing a wonderful job, faculty of family medicine in Pakistan. They were doing different courses and they were all together thinking of doing a comprehensive course. And then, luckily, we were able to marry these both the sides which were doing their efforts at their own level and sincerely for Pakistan. And today we are here, and I'm very heartening and very happy to see that. And now from here we are actually going forward with. And we have the young generation here. I see myself sitting there and thinking about family medicine, taking as my career in coming years. So you people are there and you are going to take lead in that. It is very fortunate for me that somebody talked about environmental health. I have been involved in environmental health apart from my other responsibilities for the last 18 years. And this family practice actually, or family medicine or PSC approach, is dependent upon the multi-sectoral approach. And that comes from the policies and plans of the government. And it is very important that when Dr. Iqbal he talked about the modifiable risk factors and the behaviors that they don't change and the behaviors of different departments and different ministries and which also don't change, because in our country we have one key for every problem, and that is Sanu key. So that key is always there. That key has to be taken away. So everybody has to think that they have to play their own part. So if all the plans and policies, for instance, for the non-communicable disease burden, because I have been involved in burden of disease study for the last 7 years from Pakistan side, and I second Dr. Kazmi that in Pakistan, when we calculate the burden of diabetes in Pakistan, it's around 28%. 25% of it is due to air pollution. So if you just cut off on the air pollution, both the indoor and outdoor air pollution, 25% of the burden of disease of diabetes will go down. And occupational safety, Professor Ikram has also talked about it. So there are many areas where primary health care physician has to work. We have the examples of NHS, we have the examples of American institutions. I just give you an example of a neighboring country, Iran. They have their own family medicine system, their own primary health care system, in which a doctor sitting in their rural health center is responsible even to check the quality of milk at the household. So to that level, a primary health care physician has to go, so that the risk factors to which the population is exposed is reduced. And if we have the proper playing fields, proper walking areas, proper policies for seat belts, and all these other non-health kind of interventions are there, they make actually they facilitate the behavioral change in the population, because when they find the opportunities to practice those, then it starts happening. I remember from 2003 when I was studying in Thailand, they used to have in their health centers in rural areas. The rural areas used to open in the evening, and their primary health care physicians, including their nurses and paramedics, because their population was aging, and now our population is also aging in another area in which we have to work very hard. So they used to have all those acrobats and exercises for their aging population, so that the burden of musculoskeletal disorder in their population goes down. At that time, they used to have it, and their PhDs used to work in the evening in extra shifts, because they knew the cost of chronic diseases of cancers or musculoskeletal disorders and in other diseases, which comes on their, which actually, which is a huge economic burden on the health system. So those policies, and we have to prepare for them, because our disease burden is not only focused to the tertiary care, it is mainly, majority of it is at the primary health care level. And if we work at the primary health care level, including involving all the stakeholders which directly or indirectly impact the efforts of healthcare, only then we will be able to contain our disease burden to some extent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You have just nailed it. Primary prevention is what family physicians do. Yes, we do secondary prevention and tertiary, but primary is where we need to focus on so that we don't end up into secondary problems or tertiary problems. Great. I think we're ready for questions and answers, and I have some really good questions here. I'm going to start off with our pre-session questions that were sent to us, and my first question is, how can we improve upon preventive care when primarily we are doing fee-for-service model type of care? So fee-for-service means as many patients as I see, as much money I make. I don't have time to tell this patient, hey, you need to stop smoking. So how do we improve the preventive care when our model is fee-for-service?
I take this question because I work in secondary care. You have to devise systems. All doctors, consultants, especially even the family physician, would not have time. The best thing is to have the counselors in your clinics. And I have devised a system whereby we have one nutritionist, one counselor I do involve my psychiatrist colleagues because mental health issues are quite a lot, and they cannot be involved at my clinic level. We have a lot of cross linkages with physical therapy and our psychiatrist colleagues, and I think that is the only way. The other thing is how good they will be at that counseling. I think then the issue comes of capacity building. If you have a nurse or a paramedic, you must train them specifically. And there are a lot of institutions now who are giving online courses. For example, I have a diabetes clinic, and I have a person trained as a podiatrist, which he did a 6 months online course with BITE in Karachi, and he went there for about 10 days of contact session. So things can happen. I know we have busy clinics. I know we are busy in hospitals. The mechanisms and the infrastructure should be developed by the state and the providing institutions. But if that doesn't exist, that doesn't mean that we should quit primary prevention or secondary prevention. There are ways and means, and if there is a will, there is a way. Thank you.
Excellent. I do want to probably put one point there as well, that fee-for-service is also quite prevalent in US. And a lot of times, if we are spending a lot of time with the patient, we can also bill based on time, how much time we spend with the patient. And if you have done 20, 30 minutes of counseling on multiple things, you can totally bill based on how much time you have spent with the patient. All right, the second question is, being a second-year medical student, what should be my approach during the course of studies so that I can bring change in the primary health care capacity?
Thank you very much. I think this is a very pertinent question, and this is related to medical. First of all, the universities, particularly Rawalpindi Medical University, is an independent institution. You don't need to see for the career track of family physician or any other specialty to the government. You need to create yourself. Universities are empowered to create the different departments themselves. They don't need the approval of any other department, any other organization unless you fulfill the requirement. Now, the question of the students, how we can motivate ourselves to go to the primary care center. This is the answer is already probably given by the curriculum. The curriculum should be designed in such a way that part of our the curricula should be delivered at the primary healthcare center, and every single medical institution must have 1 or 2 primary healthcare centers either within the premises or preferably it should be in the community. And so we have created it in the community, Nurpur Shah, and the Rawalpindi Medical University has already made several BHQs. They can adopt one or the other BHQ and send their students there with the teachers of the either the primary healthcare physician or if not available probably community medical people. They are also taking the students to the community so that they could be familiarized with and now these students come to us with a lot of enthusiasm, and our first duty is to improve that, and we should not be trying to kill their enthusiasm if they are going to serve their people. Thank you very much.
I would I'd just like to add to the first 2 questions. We just heard some time back during this discussion the word of teaching. I think gone are the days for teaching. What we need is the mentors. And all the seniors, they should be there as mentors. It's not only the education, तालीम और तरबियत. Unfortunately, तालीम हमारे माशरे में बहुत ज़्यादा हो गई है, तरबियत गायब हो गई है. इस जिसकी वजह से हमें नुकसान हो रहा है. So both have to go together, and it all comes under the umbrella of mentorship. So the student, because as it says, and I quote, education not sows the seed in you, but make your seed grow, I unquote. Now this is the thing, you have that thing instincts inside. How the things fascinate you is basically the answer. And how we keep on seeing so many abnormal things which we now started calling as new normals, which still remain an abnormality. We heard about the safety belts, we heard about those in your talk. But here you can see the vehicles coming from the opposite side as well. It has become, unfortunately, a new normal. So do we need to accept those things? No, they would never be acceptable. So the thing is to transform. And as far as the students and others are concerned, I think public health is still a bit evolving specialty in our country. And with the role as already highlighted earlier by the community medicine and the public, they have a great role in this, and especially fascinating the youngster to joining that and then starting the community outreach. Yet another neglected aspect is the community. We don't go out to the masses for prevention. Rather, we wait them to be sick and then come down to the hospital, and that definitely increases the load. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have quite a few questions from students, and I love it. I see the interest. That's awesome. So another one. Until students at undergraduate level are exposed to many aspects of prevention described here, they will not practice it. I agree. There is information overload, so added to the curriculum will be difficult. However, short online courses to explain these aspects will be helpful. What is your comment on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very good question. The reason being that where we have Google Doctors, we also have a lot of online courses which confuse the students which one to take and which one to not take, and how they steer your career thinking. So it's important that whenever you see an online course in a subject in which you are interested, look at the credibility. There are some portals like edX and Coursera and a couple more which are, for instance, they are from MIT or Oxford University. Those courses, they are free without certificate, and they charge a little bit for their certificate. But they have their credibility. So you can look at the credibility. Here, another point is also there, which I think our medical students, they must know that there are some conferences and they try to attract you. There are some journals they try to attract you, but they are not genuine. So sometimes you get trapped into that, to spend your money on that, and you get nothing. So first of all, look at a course which helps you in your career path, and it is from a credible university or a credible online system. And then divide your time in which you can, because most of the credible, and WHO also gives a lot of credible courses, and nowadays they have one course on Corona, which is available online, and there is WOMCA is also offering a course on COVID-19. So those courses you can opt for and take those courses. Thank you.
One other thing that I may suggest is when a student comes and starts a rotation with me, they usually ask me, Dr. Rafiq, tell me what kind of, where do you want me to study from? What books to look at? What online things are available that you feel relevant to your rotation? So it is all right that whichever rotation you go to, please go ahead and ask your your consultant that I'm really interested, I'm in gastroenterology, I really want to learn this. Tell me what are the resources I can look at. Trust me, they will be happy to hear that, and they will be happy to help you guys out. All right, with this, there is a question on collaborative care. They say we need to involve the lady health visitors and medical technicians to be trained as well for a good preventive care. Please, any comments on that?
I will definitely advocate for that. In my role, which was many years back, in Pakistan, Family Planning Association and John Snow Inc. Sponsored a project on maternal and child health care. We developed rural care centers in the periphery of Lahore. I think we established 12 of them, and we trained traditional birth attendants. Because this is a culture and a society where at that level, I won't call midwifery because there are more of midwifery schools now. Years back in the 90s, there were not many, but training the traditional birth attendants in communities definitely reduces the mortalities and improve outcomes.
Excellent point. We can all work together. If midwives have taken a role to deliver a normal vaginal delivery, a family physician sitting in a basic health unit can totally help with complications like shoulder dystocia, postpartum hemorrhage, something that a midwife may not be able to handle. So that's why the training of family physicians are very important. All right, the next question is regarding completely on preventive screening. They say in UK, USA, most of the screening like pap smears, colonoscopies, mammograms, PSAs, lipid profiles, these are all ordered by a family physician. Whereas here, it kind of falls into whichever specialty you're saying. You have an abdominal pain, you go to a gastroenterologist and he or she will say, hey, you probably need a scope now. So what can be done in Pakistan to help improve and push the preventive stuff towards general practitioners and family physicians?
I will just make a short comment on this. I think definitely it has to go through a whole system change because it's more of a specialist-oriented culture, fee-for-service kind of. But we can, once an electronic system is established in Pakistan, the model I like back in the US is Kaiser Permanente in California and many other states. Over there, they have everything electronic, and if a patient is going, first of all, if the patient does not fill a prescription, the doctor would know that I prescribed medications for diabetes, but the patient did not fill them. And there are many reminders, like you go to the pharmacy and they can see that, okay, ma'am, you didn't go for your mammogram this year, that pops up. So involving other disciplines along with the family physician would definitely be a good support.
Yeah, I can just add to it that recently in Pakistan, in Ministry of Health, they have done a lot of work with the experts, and there is WHO's disease control priority. It's volume 1, volume 2, and now it's volume 3. It's all evidence-based interventions at the primary healthcare level. So they have worked on it, and those going to be piloted in Islamabad first, and then in the provinces. Those have a set of interventions for primary and secondary health care, specifically for primary health care, including some screening, where, for instance, for example, for breast cancer, self-examination, or and if the referred to the RAC from the BHU, then by the doctor, by the female doctor there. So they have prioritized it, and those are the part of in most of them, I think all of them, they are part of the new curriculum for the family medicine that have been designed.
I just want to add to the same point. I think it's very important for the state to have the mechanisms, and we'll wait for that day when the state does act on its responsibility. But for the time being, the community, the society has a responsibility as well. And I think the health education, it's the job of us health professionals that for the community and for the society, even for the layperson who are not educated, these days social media is very important. Of course, we are saying print and electronic media, and they have their own outreach. But the deepest reach these days is social media. And I think the societies like this must utilize social media to educate the general public, to do these screenings and health checks at their own level, for person like breast self-examination, to get the health checks, and most importantly, try to prevent the diseases which are very easily preventable. For example, these days there's scare of coronavirus, and everybody knows that they have to wash their hands, not touch things and like that. And it's just because the social media and the electronic media both are playing a very active role. That has been played by the government in form of ads for polio and things like that. But the uptake of those things is not as good. It's just that perception within the community has to change, and we as health professionals must strive to change those perceptions. Thank you.
You know, these days, there are days for everything. So I know sometimes I'm going to the hospital and I see big bowls. It's the World Colonoscopy Day. tell your patients to get the colonoscopies done. So, you know, something like this can be generated. It can come on media. It can be big billboards, and we can educate people that this is important, that you need to get your screenings done.
Just like to add, I mean, and it's an excellent question. I mean, talking about screening and the mechanism existing in the developed world coming down to the developing countries. But look, there is a huge cost effect attached to that. Recently, we calculated for number of diseases and how much it's going to be. But still, we should not be bothered about the cost. We should be bothered about the cost effectiveness in the long run as far as prevention is concerned. So recently, the first ever National Cancer Registry has been launched. And to start with, a few number of tumors to start as for screening, and all those modalities are being evaluated, and certain a number of metabolic diseases on the other side. So I think this is the high time to start with. And in this, I would say the academic institute, the medical universities and medical colleges can play a lot of pivotal role to start with. And I think there are modalities which that can be discussed later on separately. Thank you.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions, and then we will have closing remarks from our chair. This question, today we see many doctors who see this profession money-wise. So they want to become a physician because they feel that they will make good amount of money. So will it not be difficult for government to organize bodies to encourage doctors to come to primary care, because if we don't pay primary care physicians good amount of money, they will probably not become a primary care physicians. So why not something done to help improve the wages? That's what they wrote, wages for the primary care physicians. Who wants to?
Yeah, very good worries, because the GP is the poor position of the society. You see, if you remember from yesterday, there was a suggestion, or I think there was a policy statement by the federal minister, including the GPs who do this course of, or do the post-graduation or become the family medical specialist in the UHC, Universal Health Coverage. And being the part of universal health coverage, they get money for seeing the patient from the government as well. And this is one incentive. And this need to be incentivized for the career path. And I was talking to, yesterday we had a discussion, and there was a suggestion that MCPS can be at the district level, and FCPS can be in the academia and at the tertiary care level. So family medical specialists later on, over a decade, they will get their place, because if a family medical specialist or a family physician in the UK earns more than a specialist, because the system is like this. Everyone has to go to the family physician, and through him, he has to go to the specialized category. So if that system is instituted and properly run and steered over the next 5 to 10 years in Pakistan, you people who opted for GP, you were the richest ones.
Okay.
Just very briefly, I think it's all here. It's not the money, it's the mindset which needs to change. And I thought I became a doctor to serve the humanity. The Holy Quran says, you save life of one person, you save the whole humanity, I unquote. So with all that in mind, having said that, definitely every person needs certain incentive. And I think the new model that you briefly, Dr. Faisal Sultan touched yesterday, once it unfolds in the near future, definitely many incentive, and I think we had so many discussions on these things. I mean, as far as if you see the military side, they've got proper hospital going to smaller cities, and even in very hard terrains. So, but the thing is, they have all the facilities attached to that. So, with all that in mind, with the new model unfolding, there are incentives attached for the public health side, for the family medicine side, and for the community side. And we hope that doctors would be encouraged with all those things in the near future to join this field as well.
Thank you very much. I thought I had time for one more question, but I'm probably going to put up this question and have our chair sum up in his closing remarks. The question was on geriatric care, care for the elderly. role of family physician in the care for elderly. If you can please also summarize in your closing remarks, please.
Thank you so much. I'm extremely grateful to Rawalpindi Medical University for organizing such an event for a couple of days. Things remain eye-openers, and still we need to open our eyes much more where we stand today. Lot has been done, but lot more is to be done. We look towards the younger generation, but I think such fora provide an open debate, and our thoughts are directed for future. As I think the students, maybe the youngsters, may not have been much well versed with the community medicine side, the public health side, the preventive aspects, which unfortunately we just teach the preventive medicine and community medicine for years and we forget about that. There's a huge debate all over the world about this, and you just heard not only that, but the recent scare of corona virus, how much prevention is effectual as far as containing this virus. So with all that in mind, I'm extremely grateful to the Vice Chancellor of the University, to all the participants, to the APNA for making it happen, for raising this awareness among the youngsters. There is a field for thought, there is a field where they can work in future. And from today even, you can start off your community outreach programs during your vacations, go out to certain far-off area and start doing whatever. And that will change the mindset. Extremely grateful to the Doc Sabha for her presentation. I think she talked very clearly about certain aspects, and I think that includes the preventive aspects, and especially more focusing on the occupational aspects attached to that. And hazards, as we know, hazards we keep coming all across. Everything, unfortunately, has certain form of hazards. And especially with the paramedics working in environments, it's not only the infection which they can carry on or pass it on, but there are so many other aspects of the patient safety as well as doctors and paramedic safety. So the time has come where we need to launch our national efforts. NIH would definitely offer all the facilities that are there for any training in infection control, patient safety. As I just told you that we have recently launched a center of excellence for training over there. Policies, I think the time has come. You've heard a lot about policies. At times we are very good at making policies, but where do they go? Actual phase starts after that, which is the implementation. And that is the lacking area. We all know that कानून है, सड़कों पे गाड़ी कैसे चलानी है. We heard about those new normals and abnormals, but कितने लोग उसको bite करते हैं. So there's definitely a scarcity where the implementation phase comes in. And we all know, we keep on day-to-day basis, we know, I mean, you just heard about the hand washing, even for corona, for all the paramedics, even it's day-to-day business. I mean, we just calculated that if, God forbid, we get more cases of coronavirus, how much of ethanol hand scrub would be required for us to be used? And it just comes down for 50 lakh population. It turns out to be 30,000 liters a day, which is a huge quantity. So with all that, I think prevention still takes a real toll, but my humble request is the attitude. Attitude has to be changed. Attitude has to be positive. The pessimism, especially coming out of the media, and so many pessimistic things. We are unfortunately thriving on two things, and I might say that openly. Andar di gal daso, kuch de hoega. Let's take these two postulates to the research side. And I think that's yet another area where unfortunately we are lacking as far as the clinical and medical research is concerned. So time for all the younger generation, because once I review the projects, I'm not talking of universities like Harvard and Oxford, which we do see, but I mean projects coming from different parts of the country for review. I mean, there's an enormous potential in the students, and our students are definitely having the same potential. And unfortunately, we are losing so many brains in the form of brain drains to the developed world. So we have to stop that. We have to nurture the brains inside. We have to follow so many things that we can do, and we have the potential. So we have to rise to the occasion. Thank you so much for everything that you have done. Thank you.
Please give a huge round of applause for the chair, the panelists, and the speaker.